Well, hello and welcome to this episode of About Time. This is the second series of my podcast where I'm taking a chance to talk to people who've inspired me and influenced me over the last 25 years. And one of them is Bill Critchley, and I'm delighted Bill is with us today. So, Bill, first of all, just welcome. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here, and as always with Chris, I've no idea what's going to happen next, but that's the exciting part.
Yeah, Bill, it might be great if you could just say a few words to introduce yourself to people, because I know many people here will know you, but perhaps there'll be some who don't. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm Bill Critchley, and I call myself an organisational psychologist because I've always found it extremely difficult to actually describe what I do without seeing people haze over before my eyes. And that includes working with organisations, a lot of facilitation. It includes working with teams. It includes coaching people. And as we may discover later, or we may talk about later, I became a psychotherapist in order to be a better organisation consultant or a D consultant. So I'm also a psychotherapist, and I know Chris from our days together at Ashridge. And people often forget to add in that I am now a grandfather. So I've got 3 grandchildren, which I'm finding myself quite excited about, actually. I'm enjoying them more than I expected.
Fantastic. So we are exactly the same on this. I have 3. Uh, 2 of them are slightly bigger, still under 10, and one of them is very, very small, a baby who's 10 months old. So, yes. Bill, we met when you were at Ashridge Consulting, and in fact, you were on the leadership team of Ashridge Consulting, and you taught on AMOC, which was the master's degree in consulting that pretty much shaped a lot of my work that came afterwards. So, thank you. But there was a Bill before Ashridge Consulting, right? So, when did you join Ashridge, and how on earth did you come to do it?
Well, there's quite a long life before Ashridge Consulting, which I'm not going to go into great detail. Although it's worth pointing out that I got into psychotherapy as a member of a group run by Robin Skinner. And I often think that as the starting point for my interest in how organizations work. But I then joined, after having done an MBA, I joined Shepherd Moscow, who in those days were, I think, probably the leading form of what in those days was called OD consultants, organization development, which I've always thought of as applied organizational psychology. So I got in there by sleight of hand, really, because I knew a lot about experienced groups. But I quite soon discovered what's now known as the imposter syndrome, because I joined this OD organization, but I had no idea how to practice. I was quite good at intuiting what's going on, but I didn't know what to do about it. So I then went in pursuit of some way of developing myself, and I then trained as a psychotherapist. I went to Metanoia and immersed myself in some messy thing called gestalt, which in those days involved beating cushions and doing a lot of kind of things that good old English boys wouldn't normally even think about. So I got involved in gestalt. I then thought that's far too messy for organizations, and I got involved with transaction analysis. And I arrived at Ashridge, having decided to leave Shepherd Moscow for a variety of reasons, with a real interest in how we might apply some ideas from Gestalt, particularly the idea about paying attention to the present, particularly the idea about observing phenomenology, being really interested in what's going on, not always interpreting, and how this. And I'd started to write about that with a guy called David Casey about how we might apply this to organizations. So when I arrived in Ashridge, I brought with me this perspective on organizational culture and organizational change, which I brought to the Ashridge Consulting, which is a subsidiary. of Ashridge. But most people in Ashridge thought I was completely off the wall. And the idea that we immerse ourselves in what's going on, the famous Bison Ocean, if you really want to change, concentrate on the present. As I say, they thought I was completely mad. And looking back on it, I think I was quite lucky to even stay in Ashridge.
Yeah. So did Ashridge Consulting exist when you joined, or were you part of making it?
Well, it was called something different, Ashridge Management Development Services, AMDS, run by a guy called Peter Beddoes. And then Peter Beddoes returned to the college as a tutor, and the job as head of AMDS was on the table, which I applied for. I'm very pleased I didn't get it, because I don't think I'd have been very good at it at that stage. And a guy called Alex Knight got it. And I learned to work with Alex, who's a very innovative guy, I thought. And so we gradually shifted from the idea of management development to organisation consulting. And that's what we called ourselves. And we went through a number of iterations of name, but we ended up, I think it's the most obvious name, we call ourselves Ashridge Consulting. So it existed, but it metamorphosed into something quite different, actually. And so the kind of OD stuff that I learned at Sheffield Moscow didn't exist until I arrived. I brought it.
Right.
I brought it. There was also something called Ashridge Teamworking Services. And when I arrived, they all said, I don't want to work with you, me. We're specialist team consultants and you're just a generalist. So bugger off is essentially what they said to me. But gradually when they met me, they said, oh, all right then.
Right. No, hang on. No, so you weren't a specialist in team stuff. Now, one of the most powerful influences you had on me was an article from years ago called Second Thoughts on Team Building, which I imagine you might have written either in the early days of this or even before you arrived.
You're quite right. Actually, so as Donald Trump famously said, I misspoke. What they're really saying is, you have entered Ashridge a different route. In order to enter our group, you needed to be interviewed by us, and they used the word sniffed by us, and we should decide whether you join us or not. So they were really saying, we're a little group within a group, and we don't want you barging in. So it wasn't so much about team working, but it was, it's my introduction to organizational dynamics that I then had to sort of try and work through and pay some attention to.
So now there are loads of ways we could go from this, because you were on the leadership team of Ashridge Consulting, and I definitely want to talk to you about that. But you also created AMOC, the master's degree, and I want to talk to you about that. Which one takes your fancy right now?
Well, I think AMOC, because I think you asked me in an email what was my finest hour, if you like, and creating AMOC was my finest hour. And that came about because gradually first of all, the gestalt orientation I brought started to catch on and people started to be intrigued. Then, as you remember, I got involved with Ralph Stacey and started to get interested in organizations as complex social processes. So I integrated it. I think I was responsible for the integration of those two aspects of what came to be the foundational pillars of Ashridge Consulting. But various people have said, Bill, we need to promulgate this. Why don't you run something? And so, the apocryphal story of in my bath one day, I thought, well, why don't I start a master's program? And I corralled a guy called Camille Kellner, who knew about master's programs, and I knew nothing about the academic field.
And was Camille at South Bank at that point?
Yes. Yeah. I met Camille because he invited me to be a speaker there. And I thought he was a good guy to teach me how to run masters. No, not how to run masters programs. I knew how to run programs, but I didn't know how to do the academic qualification, the accreditation bit. And a guy called David Fisher, and the three of us really created AMOC, and we got it accredited in 6 months. And everyone afterwards said, 6 months? It should have taken you 2 years. Because I didn't know that it was supposed to take a long time. And one of the interesting things is, Alex just allowed me to get on with it. I didn't have to produce any proposals in those days. I didn't have to tell him what I was doing. I just kept Alex informed, and then we arrived at the accreditation day. A great act of leadership. Alex, who had not been involved at all, came into the room in his suit and sat down next to me in front of these people who were accrediting me. And whenever he saw me getting over-exercised, he would just put his hand on my arm and say, I think what Bill's trying to say here is, it was a brilliant act of leadership, keeping me supported, keeping me from blowing it. And we got it accredited. And then from that moment on, I started bringing faculty, I must admit, of my choosing, which became a bit of an issue later, because there was no process by which people were interviewed or anything. I just said, I want Adrian McLean on the programme, who was my closest colleague. And I brought in Robin Ladkin and all the people you know. But I was allowed just to basically do what I wanted.
Brilliant. Now, how did you know them? So how did you know Adrian? Because Adrian's brilliant, right? And you also sing brilliant duets together, of course. But
I'll do one now.
I can't join you. I'm not Adrian. But how do you know Adrian?
I knew Adrian. First of all, I think I went to a conference, and there was this guy, rather fuzzy, bearded guy sitting there, and I think we warmed to each other, and then he invited me to go to Bath Consulting, where he was in the middle of trying to put a program together with Peter Hawkins and his wife Martha and various others, and I was going to be on that faculty, but it never flew. So it's interesting. It's always interesting where you think things started. So you could argue it started there. You could also argue it started with Patricia Shaw and I, eons before that, writing on the back of an envelope, this is the kind of program we like to run. But anyway, that was where I met Adrian, which was your question. It's where I met Marsha. And Adrian became my closest professional buddy, because as you rightly say, we always think that working with other OD consultants is a good thing to do, which it is, but it also happens to be often very difficult, different viewpoints, etc. And Adrian and I always riffed off each other in what I felt was a special kind of way. If I can quickly say, he and I were once running one of the AMOC workshops for an American, for Case Western, who were visiting Ashridge.
Yeah.
And I was introducing complexity theory, and Adrian was talking about Bateson. And at one stage he said, Bill, I think there's another way of looking at this, what you're talking about. And I said, oh, that's interesting, Adrian. Yeah, but you need to take this into account as well. I'm not sure I agree with that. And suddenly an American banged his fist on the desk and said, do you see what I see? They're having a dialogue. Now, in American universities, no one ever disagrees with a tutor. So he and I were just very good at that kind of thing.
And what about Robin?
Sorry?
Robin Ladkin. How did Robin come into this?
Because Robin had moved from the college side. I don't know whether our viewers will know that Ashridge, it had a little bit of a demarcation line between those who taught in the college and those of us who are more interested in being in the weeds with organisations. He taught at the college and he moved over, and I think he and I hit it off. He was at that stage a neophyte in consulting, and I think he initially was rather enamoured with me, and so it's always nice to be if someone thinks you're good. So I invited him to join because I thought he'd got some interesting stuff. So that's how he arrived. Yeah.
Brilliant. Huh. And so AMOC ran for, what was it, 20 years?
I think there's one moment I'm remembering. One of our administrators, Kate, what was her second name? Can you remember?
Kate Campbell.
Yeah, Kate Campbell.
Yeah.
She was my administrator, and we all went off when AMOC was emerging. We all went off to a hotel somewhere down in the West Country, and we created a brochure together. And I've still got a copy of that because I remember Karen Vanstone, who later joined, said, I was trying to select some master's program to go on, and I kept seeing your brochure and thinking, well, that's not what I'm looking for. But I kept coming back to it because it kind of was saying something. And that creation together of something that kind of spoke about our philosophy, what we were trying to do, was an important part of our evolution. And as you say, went on about 20 years.
Yeah. So what was the connection, because I'm sure there was one, between that Ashridge program starting and the Centre for Action Research at Bath, the co-op?
Well, there wasn't a formal connection.
Oh, okay.
But Adrian had been a tutor at Bath, and I think Peter Reason was one of the associates of Bath Consulting when I was turning up there.
Ah, right.
And so when Adrian arrived on AMOC, he brought with him this whole field of which was called action inquiry. And Reason, Peter Reason and Judy Marshall were the major exponents of that down at Bath. So in a sense, and they were also majorly informed by Gregory Bateson. So that view, Bateson's view, systemic view, action inquiry, was broadly brought to us by Adrian, and it fitted very well, I think, with my more psychological and complexity views. And and that was another integration, I think, that was created largely through Adrian and I think. And then later, Robin became very enamored with the whole inquiry process. And it's easy to feel I was the first mover, but then, of course, enormous contributions were made by Robin and Adrian and Hugh and other faculty members who brought their own stuff and their own perspectives.
Yeah. And where did the wonderful Charlotte come into this? Because I've always thought of you and Charlotte as being a spectacular teaching and consulting pairing. So where did you come across Charlotte?
Well, Charlotte and I trained together at Metanoia, and we were in the same training group, the same psychotherapy group. However, she had nothing to do with AMOC. At some stage, again, people were saying, well, where have you got your one-on-one skills from? Because I've been training psychotherapy. And so I thought maybe what we need in Ashridge is something which came to be called coaching for consultants.
Yes.
And I initiated that, and I brought in Charlotte to bring in a psychological, strengthen the psychodynamic or the psychotherapeutic perspective. And she and I launched that program called Coaching for Consultants, which then morphed into Ashridge Masters in Executive Coaching. But as a program, it's been one of the longest running programs in Ashridge. I think it's still going.
Yeah. Still going, indeed.
Yeah, still going. But that's how Charlotte got involved.
Ah, right. Brilliant. Yeah. So
she gave me a Parker pen to commemorate the fact her shift from psychotherapy into the kind of organizational world, which I appreciate.
Very good. So you ran AMOC for this actually huge length of time. I mean, what did you learn from running it?
Well, for example, I've just mentioned I knew little about inquiry when I joined, when I started it. So that was a whole different dimension. So I learned about inquiry, and in a sense, inquiry, I now think consulting is basically a form of action inquiry. So that's a major learning for me, I think. And I learned we started to get interested in what became known as the ologies. So what are epistemological and ontological theories? And so that was pretty new to me. So I started to learn. I'd started to learn the academic perspectives that I needed to understand in order to, participate in sort of academic running of this program. So that was new to me. And as you know, it later became the Ashridge Doctorate in Organisational Consulting. And I was a doctoral supervisor for a while. So that I really learned. The way I think about it is rigor in asking the questions. Well, when you say that, what does that really mean? What are your underpinning assumptions? So that kind of rigor in inquiring into how people are thinking, what do they mean? Are people really reflecting on what they're doing here? So that was a major learning for me throughout this whole period.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. And I think one of the delights of having you as my teacher, because I had you as my teacher on AMOC and on the coaching program at different times, was seeing that rigor, but sometimes just in the tiniest thing, which I think came from your gestalt training, where I remember you were running one coaching group asking for volunteer, and a participant almost got up and then got down and then got up again. And you just said, well, I just noticed that feels like it's going to be important to what we're going to talk about. Tears, complete opening of everything. Of course it was. And but that was incredible rigor in just a little tiny gesture.
And you're right. I think that is a Gestalt notion of being really paying attention, not just to what people say, but to physical movements that came from Gestalt. But it was also, I think, supplemented by the idea of inquiry. What's happening when you make this movement with your hands? What's happening when you seem to be withdrawing from the group? Picking up on those moments, because I now think it's second nature to me now, but many people are quite shocked that I, and now maybe people like you, draw attention to those kind of subtleties.
Yes, it's second nature to me now, and it's all your fault.
Goody, I'm pleased about
that. So also the fact that I can't say noticing without doing that, Bill.
Yes, I know.
It's also,
it was me that did that, wasn't it? Yes,
it was. Yeah, but you did it with both hands. So go back to well, we could spend hours on any of this, but go back to Ashridge Consulting for a minute, because in recent times I've seen people writing about teal organizations and self-organizing communities and how we need organizations to learn to do it. And you've occasionally written responses when we used to write on Twitter going, well, there used to be a place that was run like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you say, because lots of people won't know anything about how AC was run, say something about it. Yeah.
Well, initially, it was run in a very disorganized, scrappy kind of way. And almost everybody who joined Ashridge was on the leadership team or joined Ashridge Consulting. And until I was telling you just before we started this, there was a point when some of the women members, because I think we probably were not sufficiently aware of diversity in those days, said, you guys aren't providing much leadership. And we all resigned at Alex's instruction, and we reformed, and I became part of the reform team. And I had some really, we all had to go and collect feedback. And we all had to say, well, why would anybody want you on the leadership team? It's a bit like, why would anyone be led by us? But it was a very rigorous exercise. I got quite shocked, actually.
And can I say that lived on, because when I joined the Ashridge Consulting leadership team, I had to go through that process too of going out and being interviewed by everybody.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that the values that emerged was we would like to be the analog of what we are offering to our clients. In other words, if we're offering to our clients a more participative view of how organizations might work better, and we were offering this view of organizations as social processes and paying attention to the social processes, we said, well, rather than just preach that, we need to ensure that we are an exemplar. Well, an exemplar sounds rather virtuous, but at least do our best to adhere to some of the principles that we're advocating. So we attempted to do that, and that kind of thing you're talking about, actually having to go and ask people why they thought we could be a member of the leadership team, things like that were I think part of how we were trying to live the principles that we were advocating. But I think one of the traps we fell into is that new people arrived thinking that we were going to be a happy family. If you remember the transactionalities model of parent, adult, child, they kind of arrived thinking they were going to be nurtured and looked after by happy parents. Of course, we tried to explain, no, we're all adults here, and there's going to be some rigor and there's going to be some performance management. And they got quite cross about that because it wasn't quite as nurturing and warm and fuzzy as they were kind of hoping. There was a kind of communist era when everyone thought, I should simply contribute what I'm good at. And when to be told, actually, you've got to go and do a number of fee-earning days, was a bit of a rude shock for some people, including me, actually. I found it difficult. I was never great at business development.
Yeah, but even when I joined, and I think I joined the college years before I joined consulting. And when I came into consulting, that rigor of peer performance management still existed. Because I remember being, I hit all my numbers because I still taught on quite a few college things. And I remember in my group them saying, well, this is brilliant. You're hitting all your numbers, but what's new in it for you? Where's your edge? It was actually quite demanding form of performance management.
It's really nice to be reminded of this. I'd forgotten that we thought about, well, how do we manage performance then? Well, let's get away from this one-on-one way of traditionally, and we created these groups, didn't we? What were they called? Can you remember?
I think they were called performance groups.
I think they were called performance groups, and I think a member of the leadership team facilitated, but it was a very peer review and quite a tough, rigorous process. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember that was the process through which I essentially got encouraged to go deeper into, depth psychology, and I actually took first of all the psychosynthesis route and then AMOC. But it was because of people pushing me in those groups. So, and this is a difficult question, and what the world needs this. So how come it's not there now?
Well, I wrote a little note to myself anticipating that question. And my little note was...
Excellent. What did you write in your note?
I wrote, things have a life curve. And what we were developing, the ideas that I think you and I are both enamored by, and I did say, didn't I, that it was kind of, what did I say? This was my finest period.
Yeah.
And there was a. I look back on it probably as a golden era when AMOC was really firing on all cylinders. When Ashridge Consulting we were in a sense transforming the organisation through the fact that we ran this program, and almost everybody, with a few exceptions, went on AMOC. And then a number of things happened. I think we lost Alex, who was a major defender against the college. Were always a mixture of jealous, antipathetic towards Ashridge Consulting. AMOC wasn't run in the way that the MBA was run, and they were a bit. Their noses were put out of joint about that. So we were always pushing against the Ashridge culture. And I think Alex protected that. I think when Ina took over, she was less protective of the Ashridge culture and wanted us to become more part of the Ashridge body. And then, of course, Ashridge got into financial trouble. And I don't know whether I should say this, but I think the then chief executive took the easy way out and sold to Hult. And I don't think that they were very interested in nurturing and sustaining niche operations.
I mean, I don't think, I don't think anybody can doubt that, Holt does what Holt does, and what Ashridge Consulting does was not that. So it
Exactly.
was
Yeah.
it was never going to be part
Yeah.
of that. Um, I mean, in some ways, I think the
But can I?
aspiration.
Hmm?
Yeah, I was going to say the aspiration to do some of that work may have continued, but what was lost completely was the being the analog. Running the organization in that way was no longer possible, and
Yeah.
that was the heart of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I could either be kind of bitter and cross about it, not now, but I mean,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
I lost something very dear to me in the process.
mm,
But if I
yeah,
was looking appreciatively, oh, that's another thing I learned about appreciative inquiry. That was
yeah.
a learning which I didn't have beforehand. You, one way you could look at it uh, is that these particular ideas took a form. That
Mm,
form then dissolved for all the reasons we're talking about, but it took different shapes in the form of your organization, in the form of Metalog. So it
mm,
still exists in
it
four or
does.
five. There's a kind of diaspora, I think, of AMOC into four or five new forms. And I think about it that way, and that gives me some comfort.
Mm, yeah.
Does that make sense to you, Chris? I'm interested.
It, it makes a lot of sense to me. You know, in many ways, I would not have created, Game Shift, but for the fact that the financial difficulties after 2008 caused Ashridge to have a major rethink, and eventually the partnership and later the takeover. Um, and I suppose I'm grateful. I just wish it had been done in a different way for me personally.
Yeah.
But I don't think old Ashridge could possibly have survived COVID, because the pensions deficit was too big. It would have been really, really hard. So
Yeah.
useful to have the depth that
Yeah.
has kept the place going. And there's still good work, as you say. The masters in coaching is still going. So, and the doctorate is still going.
Indeed. But there's something I just wanted to say. Again, in this period of time when I thought we were running Amok in a particularly generative and vital way, if you have been accredited, then you have to conform to certain academic principles. One of those was we had to have a monthly. What was it called? We had to have a review,
Right. Yeah.
a sort of quality review.
Of the masters program.
Yes. And
Yeah.
in my day, I chaired it, and we took it as an opportunity to reflect on everything that was going on. I think we'd have a whole day's meeting, and it was a very generative process, and we simply wrote up some minutes and it went to Middlesex. Middlesex were our validators. I
Yes.
think that Ashridge got its own validation pass, and what happened is this very generative process turned into a bureaucratic process where that meeting took half a day and just a series of headline minutes. So it lost what was, I think, the shift, first of all, to Ashridge being the accreditors away from Middlesex, who gave us a lot of freedom, and then
Yes.
to Hull, brought in a whole new bureaucratic, rather ossified approach to these things.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
another example of in Amok, we tried to be the analog, but
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
pushing
And
against the
Bill,
academic community. Mm.
and in the last few years, my work has moved mainly into universities, and I work with lots of university leadership teams, and I teach on the TMP, which is a top management program for university leaders. And this story you're telling actually is really common. I think
Yeah.
there's been, as Ralph very early in the day pointed out, there's a huge when things are changing a lot, there's a huge sucking force towards creating structures and certainty
Yes.
rather than sitting with the complexity.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? It's yeah.
Yeah. You you're reminding me is I was also working for a university, and we were running large group workshops on culture change, and then I discovered that they got 44 committees, and I remember going to the whatever they were called, not the dean, but the guy who was running it. I said, you know what, we're wasting our time unless you're going to change this structure. Um, we're not going to bring about any change. And he finally saw the point and reduced it from 44 to 22. But it's still a lot, isn't it? I mean,
Well, it is quite a lot, but look at that, 50% performance improvement. You get an enormous bonus for that.
yes, I would.
You should be chief executive of something.
I don't think I'd be very good as a chief executive. A bit of me would like to have been, but then I think I would have turned. I'd have become a little bit dictatorial. I suspect that shadow side of me would have probably emerged.
Yeah. Well, do you know, on an earlier podcast, the end of series 1, Kai was on here, and we were talking about some of the stuff that you and I have been talking about here. And he said that one of his great, well, one of the things he's noticed is just how zealous higher education bureaucracy can be. So, you can have rules which can be largely, interpreted loosely, or you can have rules and frameworks that are absolutely rigorously attended to a massissive degree. And he said higher education tends towards that one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what you were talking about in the framework, not both the accreditation frameworks as they got more bureaucratic, but the evaluation framework.
Absolutely. Very bureaucratic indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Bill, I noticed that we're getting very close to 40 minutes. We could clearly talk for hours and hours, but I wanted to know what are you doing now? Because you haven't stopped, have you? You've published a compendium of your papers, but you're also still working.
Well, at the moment, I am still working. I'm doing more psychotherapy than I used to do, because it used to be very much a sidebar. As I'm doing more of that, I'm doing quite a bit of supervising, which I really like. It brings out the best of me, but I'm not doing much organizational work. And part of me is pleased about that, because the politics of doing large-scale organizational work are quite stressful. But part of me is missing it. I was supervising someone today who is a director in a charity, and a bit of me felt I've still got. It's like I'm still quite finely attuned to the realities of organizations, how they work, and I found myself really being able to offer him some useful stuff. So it's a bit like there's this quite finely tuned machine here, not being applied widely enough, is how I sometimes feel.
Yeah, and I don't do as much myself, but mainly because the whole point of Game Shift was to create a group of people to do it instead of me. And a lot of my time is involved in just talk. I would say my role is to talk to good people so that good things happen. But I do bits and bobs.
I like working at Chris, and I think it's not just people often say it gives you a sense of purpose, but I think I, and probably you, are quite fortunate in that we do work that we do feel makes a difference. I mean, when people ask me what I'm doing to save the climate, I say, well, I'm saving the world one person at a time. I think what I do is worthwhile, and so long as I can go on doing it and I have sufficient marbles, I should go on doing it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, in the last 2 weeks, Bill, I've been to two things that both made me think about you and all the work we've done over the last 20 years. I was at Said Business School for the Open Strategy Conference, where Philippa and I presented a paper and just a poster presentation, and you would have been very happy with that, because it was about the closed closets of open strategy. I mean, all the dirty little secrets of group dynamics and things that don't get talked about in open strategy processes. And that, of course, comes from all of the work that I learned at Ashridge and we've done since. And then just this week, I've had 4 days at Exeter, just finished at lunchtime, at the Global Tipping Points Conference, which is the Earth System Science Conference, Johan Rockstrom and others. And they're talking about the need to harness the science, the social science, the multidisciplinary thinking and action across communities. And of course, that participative work is the stuff that we and people in the wider OD field have been focusing on
For
since the
years.
1970s.
I know. And for years, people are saying we must do this. And I think one of the things you were saying is at least it came together a lot, albeit in a small way, when AC was at its best.
Yeah, yeah. But it has to come together again if we're going to have any hope of addressing some of these global tipping points, because there is no one silo that can fix this. The solutions are, multi-domain.
I know. Yeah.
So
But I do think people have been saying this for years. Who's that woman? Is it Margaret someone or other? She's an academic and she does TED Talks.
Margaret Wheatley or Margaret
No,
Heffernan?
Hefferman.
Yeah.
There have always been loud voices, intelligent voices, saying these things. But I suppose I find it quite frustrating. Somehow that we don't pull together. I don't think. I certainly, at least, have not found a way of. I mean, I've tried to connect with Hefferman, but they always tend to be doing their own thing, and the ability to collaborate and really make something happen on a larger scale seems very difficult. But maybe that's what you're doing.
Well, we're a small and colourful fish in a very large pond. So, we work with hope, but I'm not naively optimistic. And I think there are a lot of very powerful forces that cause the whole system, the whole process to be pulled the other way. There's lots of forces for being siloed and smaller. There are some very exciting voices for being bigger and joined up, but they don't tend to have the big money behind them and the big platforms behind them. And I think there has to be a way. Well, there has to be a way, like COP30 in Brazil, in the Amazon, when it comes up, it has to get these things joined up. If you were supervising the organisers of COP, what might the climate conference, the next climate conference, or supervising the governments of the world? Like, how the hell do we make some progress on this? I mean, I know it's a totally unfair question, but you're a supervisor. What might you say? I know. Really sorry, Bill.
That's a bit. I was just thinking that this ought to be the subject of another podcast. But I did actually. I was supervising the Cabinet Office about 10 years ago. And initially, I was essentially inviting them to pay attention to what was going on. And I'd set up an inquiry process and said, let's spend the next half day. I wasn't teaching, but just saying, what do you make of this stuff? So it was a kind of systemic perspective. And initially, they were all very enthusiastic and said, yes, that's absolutely right. And it kind of, yes, it's awful, isn't it? And we're awful, aren't we? For allowing this stuff to go on. And then I started to tentatively say, well, how about then we've formed some groups around these issues that would do something about it? And the chief executive of the Cabinet Office essentially told me that was his job and not mine. So I was pushed off quite quickly. But I think it is quite difficult for people like us when we are up against the power dynamics and the power politics to really make a difference. And so, and I think we both pointed out that how power works and how difficult it is to engage with it. So it's I don't know how I would. I'd love that opportunity, but I'm quite sure it'd be extremely challenging.
Yeah, well, I've always said it's essential for the way I work that I'm prepared to get sacked, and indeed, if I don't get sacked periodically, I'm not being rigorous enough.
But you've got to stay on the line between being sacked and making a difference. If you keep getting sacked, you're not going to make a difference.
You can't do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I try not to get sacked, Bill.
Well,
Yeah,
but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a nation. I've always said people have to identify with you sufficiently to be willing to work with you. It's important that you don't then become a collusive with them in order to get the work and earn the money. But if you're too far on the other side of the line, you get thrown out. So straddling this kind of edge, I'm sure Stacey had a word for that, didn't he? What was it? It was actually it was another guy who talked about managing on the edge, but that notion of managing on the edge of stability and instability, challenge and support, I think is it's a continuous challenge
it
for
is.
us.
All right, Bill, we're right up against time, so we will have to stop. But I really like your idea that there might be another podcast in this to do with global tipping points and goodness knows what. And you never know, we may get you and Margaret Heffernan on it. Let's see what.
Well, it would be good, wouldn't it, to have you and some of your colleagues and me and Hefferman, I mean, a group of 5 or 6 people getting serious about this question. I think it would be great.
Right. So,
All
Bill,
righty.
I'll come back to you in a moment to say a proper thank you. But let me just say to the people who've been watching and listening, massive thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. There will be more, so keep an eye on the podcast site wherever you get your normal podcast from. We've got a series up there, and series 2 is coming out soon. Bill, thank you so much for being here. It's been a delight to talk to you, and as ever, we've covered a wonderful amount, and we could have talked for hours. So, thank you so much.
And thank you for the invitation.
Brilliant. Stay well, Bill. Cheers, everybody.